I'm currently in a predicament and, quite frankly, I don't know what to do. I'll start from the beginning. 5 years ago, my next-door neighbor, Thomas, informed us of his 14-year-old son's disappearance. He reported it to the police. It was on the news. It was everywhere. My wife and I felt absolutely awful and always offered to help them out in any way we could. As the years passed with no word of their son, we assumed they eventually came to terms with it and realized the worst had probably happened. My wife and I never had the nerve to ask if the body ever turned up. Occasionally, Thomas and his wife would invite us over for a barbecue during the warmer months. We noticed neither of them were ever the same since their son had gone missing. Thomas's wife, Sarah, was always quieter and more reserved, and Thomas just seemed more awkward and nervous. Both reactions were understandable to a certain extent. Fast forward a couple of years to just last week. Thomas came over to me when I was taking out the garbage and asked to borrow a shovel. Without hesitation, I ran to get him my best shovel, not asking why he needed it. He thanked me and said he just had to do some work in his backyard and would get it back to me by tomorrow. He then disappeared into his backyard. I went inside, and when I was by one of my upstairs windows that has a clear view into Thomas's backyard, I could see he was digging a really big hole in the ground. He seemed to be struggling a bit. He's 56 after all. I figured I'd go grab my second shovel and help him out. As I entered his backyard and called his name, he looked up from what he was doing, dropped my shovel, and hurried over to me saying, No, it's okay. Dan, I got it. Please just leave. I said, What's wrong with you? It's not a big deal, mainly because of his bizarre reaction. He told me, I will not allow you to use that shovel in my backyard, and then pointed to the gate as if I were a dog. I was so taken aback by how he was acting that I just left without saying another word. I went upstairs to spy on him through the window. He was digging the hole for at least another half hour. When it finally looked like he was done, he started looking around, like up high at neighboring houses as if to check and make sure nobody was watching. Then, before I could think to hide, he spotted me at my window. All I could do at that point was casually walk away. He's up to something, and I wanted to find out what. I continued to look at his backyard every so often, but he wasn't digging anymore. I figured he knew I was watching now and would wait until it was dark out, and I was exactly right. At 1:30 in the morning, I heard the sound of a shovel hitting the dirt outside. It was too dark to see anything from my window now, so I snuck outside quietly and looked over the fence into his backyard. I could see him digging loud and clear now. When he went inside his house, I took that opportunity to sneak into his backyard and take a look at what was in the hole he was digging. The moonlight alone revealed a small piece of a black garbage bag protruding from the dirt at the bottom of the hole. I looked at his back door and back at the hole. I did this 3 more times, deciding whether or not to see what was in the bag. In the end, I decided to run back to my backyard, and it was a good thing I did because he came back outside seconds later, but he wasn't digging. In fact, he disappeared to the other side of his house and didn't come back. I went back into my house and quietly got back into bed, trying not to wake up my wife. The next day, the first thing I did was look out my window to see that the hole in the ground was completely patched up in Thomas's backyard. I also noticed that his SUV was parked in the street now instead of his driveway. I don't know what happened throughout the rest of that night, but I'm disturbed to think that what was at the bottom of that hole might have been his son's body. For all I know, he dug up that hole to remove whatever he had previously buried down there and drove it somewhere else to dispose of it. This is all speculation. Call me crazy if you want. I haven't told anyone, not even my wife. And quite frankly, I don't know what to do. Thomas never gave me back my shovel. I'm not going to ask him for it. In fact, he's been avoiding me ever since. Something disturbing happened yesterday. By coincidence, I happened to look out my window across to Thomas's house and caught him standing at one of his windows looking into mine. When he saw me, he shut his blinds, and that was in the middle of the day. I have no idea what to do, but I'm honestly terrified. I've lived in 3 houses in my life, 2 with my family and my current house by myself. We lived in the first house for the first 15 years of my life and the second house for the next 7 before I moved out to my current home. This experience happened in my first home when I was 15, within the last few months of my family living in that house. I don't remember my family ever being really friendly with the neighbors. In fact, there were 2 kids living next door with their dad that my brother and I had only talked to maybe once or twice in our entire lives. As bizarre as that is, we did know both of their names, Eric and Todd. One day, my brother, who is 5 years younger than me, and I were outside playing basketball on the driveway when Todd came outside and walked over to us, initiating a conversation. I don't remember what we said to each other word for word, but I remember the first thing he asked us was if it was true that we were moving. As the older brother, I did most, if not all, of the talking. Todd was probably the same age as me. I never actually asked. By the end of the conversation, he invited me to come with him and his brother to shoot BB guns by the river in the woods down the road the next day. I agreed since it was the weekend and I didn't have anything going on anyway. My little brother asked if he could come at the last second, not under the assumption that he was automatically invited as well. Todd said, "Yeah," and then walked away. Late the next day, around an hour before dusk, Eric and Todd rang the doorbell. We were quick to answer the door because our parents didn't know that we were going out to shoot BB guns. Walking down the sidewalks with Todd and Eric decked out in camo gear and carrying a duffel bag of BB guns was really strange. The level of seriousness these two clearly had in this was really weird to my brother and me, and we kept meeting eyes, holding in our laughter a couple of times because of it. We got to the woods having spoken very few words. I could already tell these two were kids of few words, which may be why we hadn't met them officially until that point. Todd dropped the duffel bag onto the ground and unzipped it while Eric aggressively snapped a branch off a tree and threw it into the river. My brother and I looked at each other again, this time not finding it funny. Todd pulled out a couple of guns and handed them to my brother and me. That's when Todd dropped the bomb and told us they were real guns. Eric grabbed a loaded gun from the bag and began firing at trees across the road. When I realized he wasn't joking about the guns being real, I was a mix of angry and confused. I grabbed the gun from my brother's hands and placed both of them back in the bag. I told them we weren't comfortable with this and had to leave. Eric stopped firing, and they both looked at us with expressions that seemed half angry. One of the boys yelled a curse word at us as we were walking away. I always had a feeling these two were bad kids, but this confirmed it. I told my brother not to speak to them anymore for the remainder of our time living there. We told our parents at the dinner table that night that they were really weird kids, but we didn't mention the gun thing. I woke up that night to a breeze of cold air hitting me in the face. My window was open all the way. I felt something hard press up against the back of my head as I was looking out the window and heard somebody behind me going, "SHH." Somehow, I didn't scream or jump. I just stayed calm. I was able to understand what was going on surprisingly quickly. I heard Todd's voice in a whisper behind my head. He told me if I ever told anybody, especially his dad, about the guns or the visit, he would come back and kill me and my entire family. I replied in a quiet, shaky voice, "Okay." He pushed my head with his gun before leaving through my window. Every night thereafter for months, I would catch either Todd or Eric at a certain window of their house, looking into either my or my brother's room. Their behavior became more and more strange as we got closer to the date of our move. Just a week before we moved, a rock was thrown at my window one night at like 1 a.m. I opened my window and saw Todd aiming a pistol up at the window, and I felt like I was about to die. I ducked over the ground only to hear the two boys crack up in laughter. I heard one of them refer to me as a coward and the other calling me a not-so-nice name. When we finally moved, I felt so relieved that I wouldn't have to see those two ever again. I never told anyone, not even my parents. I'm not sure if my brother did either. I don't have a lot of people in my life, but I'm very close with the few people that are in my life. My best friend is named John. We've been friends since childhood and have grown closer than ever, especially now that we both live alone and hang out so often. One night, we met up to do some night fishing at the nearby lake. While we were sitting by the lake, John told me this story about something that happened to him recently that he hadn't told anybody yet. One night, he was on his way to the gas station when he saw a man standing in the road waving his arms. John slowed down, thinking the man might need help. When he rolled down his window, the man, who looked to be in his 40s, started begging for a ride, saying his car broke down a mile down the road. John hesitated but eventually agreed to give the man a ride. The man thanked him and got into the passenger seat. As John drove down the dark, empty road, he noticed the man kept looking over at him with an unsettling grin. John tried to keep the conversation light, asking the man about his car and where he was headed. The man gave vague answers and kept glancing at John in a way that made him increasingly uncomfortable. Suddenly, the man asked John to pull over. When John did, the man reached into his pocket and pulled out a knife. He demanded John hand over his wallet and phone. John complied, his heart pounding in his chest. The man took his belongings and got out of the car, disappearing into the darkness. John was left shaken and drove straight home, not stopping at the gas station. He reported the incident to the police, but they never found the man. John told me he was still paranoid and kept looking over his shoulder, even when he was at home. I couldn't believe what I was hearing and felt a chill run down my spine. We decided to pack up our fishing gear and head home. Later that night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about John's story and how easily it could have happened to me. I got up and double-checked all the locks in my house before finally going to bed. As I was drifting off to sleep, I heard a noise outside my window. I got up and peeked through the blinds but saw nothing. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, but the feeling of unease stayed with me. The next day, I told John about the noise I heard. He looked concerned and suggested we be more cautious and look out for each other. Since then, we've both been more vigilant and make sure to check in with each other regularly. The incident has made us even closer, but it also left us both with a lingering sense of paranoia. Life has returned to normal for the most part, but I can't shake the feeling that the man is still out there, watching and waiting for his next victim.